Basically, when I was 10 years old, summer 1991, I lived with both my parents up on a place called Muddy Creek Mountain. And I always tell people when I speak at the events, if you have trouble imagining the area, imagine Wrong Turn. These classic backwoods, 10 acres of woods, 1 acre of grass, 2 houses, a trailer on the right, which where we lived in, and an old Civil War time shack that my grandmother lived in on the other side. There was one way in, one way out of the property, and that was something my father made a point to tell us on a normal basis, that we couldn't leave. My father was never really abusive towards us children. The factor I had to deal with was the emotional abuse from watching him do what he did to my mother. There would be horrible fights. He'd beat her up. There would be times she'd have to go to work at the hospital with bruises, black eyes, teeth knocked out, hair ripped out of her head. It wasn't a good situation at all. One evening, August 1991, this all culminated when my father, who got terribly drunk, got in another fight with my mother, and my mother proclaimed she was leaving, that this was it, that she's done with the marriage, she's done with everything, and we're leaving. And my father became enraged. So, in the midst of this drunken rage, he got out a gun. It was a shotgun. I think it was an old Navy rifle he had. And he basically proclaimed we were all going to die that night. He was going to kill each one of us, my older sister, me, my younger brother, my younger sister, my mother, and even his mother, our grandmother, and then himself. The main image that stays in my mind is the 4 of us surrounding my mom and her holding my younger sister on her lap, my younger brother on her other lap, and I'm kind of crouched in front of her, and my sister's standing behind her, basically whispering to my mom, I want to leave, I want to leave. When this is over, I want to leave. And my grandmother was actually sitting in a chair right across the table. So we're all trapped in this tiny little kitchen that's about half the size of this room we're in right now. Every one of us looked up the barrel of that shotgun. It was scary. We thought we was going to die. And my dad wanted to make sure that even after this whole situation was over, we didn't leave. So for about 2 minutes, he walked out of the house to go do something to the car to where it wouldn't start. While he was gone, my mother called the police. And this was 1991, so police weren't as involved in domestic affairs as they are today. So they basically told my mother, we don't handle domestic affairs. And my mother told him, well, in that case, can you at least come in the morning to make sure my children are all right, because I'm going to die tonight. My husband's going to shoot me. He's already told me. Well, then the operator realized my mother wasn't playing around, that this wasn't just a typical fight. And fortunately, there was a state trooper who was going 3 miles down my road, which 2 o'clock in the morning, late night, summer, this area where I lived, you did not see cops unless hunting season was approaching. So a state trooper pulled up literally within minutes after my mom got off the phone with him. And my father knew what was happening, and he ran back into the woods where he could hide. And state trooper didn't even bother trying to find him. He just gathered us kids up and took us to this place that he called the Family Refuge Center. Now, I didn't know where we was going. I just knew we was going. And wherever it was, it had to be better than where we were. Family Refuge Center back then was actually an old white farmhouse that is where Robert C. Burt Clinic stands now in downtown Lewisburg. Which, that was the only thing I do remember is once we went to Lewisburg, we were going to be in Lewisburg, which to us might as well have been New York City. Alderson was a very small town, and if we went to Alderson, it was an event. So coming to Lewisburg would be like, for most people, going to Charlotte or Miami or something like that. Something was going to happen. And then we pulled up to this big white farmhouse that's right next to a big car dealership and right in the midst of downtown Lewisburg. So we thought we was going to be staying in a mansion. It was just amazing seeing this big house, but yeah, at the same time, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and at that point, I think we could have just stayed in a motel when it mattered, as long as there was a bed.
I remember Roger and his family when they first came to the Refuge Center. I don't remember the particular day that he talked about, but there were these very sweet children because they had a very sweet mother.
The stay at the shelter was different. I'd never been a part of a group like Family Refuge Center was back then. It was a strange process. I was meeting all these new staff people I'd never seen before. There was other kids around, and outside of school, I never really interacted with many other kids. So it was strange. Actually, our first day at Family Refuge Center, there was a summer camp, and this was the last day of that summer camp program. So they went and took all the kids out to lunch, had a picnic, and then we got to swim at a local swimming pool. And first day at this new place, I just know that I just got treated to a picnic and I'm going swimming. I'd never done that before in my life. That was my first time in a pool. So 24 hours after I stayed at this place, I was starting to think, okay, this is going to be kind of cool. I'm going to like it here.
Our primary goal was to provide shelter. And after that, we had to learn what was helpful and what people needed. And that's different for different people, but what turned out to be helpful was to have a stable, home-like atmosphere and people who cared.
Everything at FRC, the way they interacted, the way they helped us so selflessly, they were so concerned about others, they really stuck out to me. And they went through all this trouble to find us an apartment. The last night, I felt I had to do something, anything to kind of show thanks for what they helped do for me at least, and of course my family. Last night I stayed at the shelter. There was a Christmas party, and all of FRC's past and current clients came, and a Santa Claus showed up, and they were giving out gifts, and there was a big dinner, and I remember the room was huge, and it was full of kids who were just going crazy getting these gifts. And they were one elf short. They picked random kids to help give out the gifts, or some of the staff would pass out gifts, and for some reason, one of them didn't show up. My mom had a Christmas hat, so I grabbed it, put it on, ran over, and started calling out names and giving out gifts. It's kind of something I did on my own, but then when the staff realized what I was doing, they were obviously all for it. They thought it was pretty cool that a kid who was staying at the shelter was giving out presents to other kids. And at first, it was kind of my way of saying thanks to FRC, and just had to have that feeling of giving back to others that like they were doing for me. That feeling I had, something had to be shared. It really stuck out to me with this one particular little girl. She was 4 or 5, and I gave her her gift, and I remember her mother telling someone else, like right there, this may be the only gift she gets this year. And that really spoke to me. And from that moment on, I pledged I was going to do it every year since. And that was kind of how my volunteering with FRC started. As years went by, as I got older, raked leaves for them. There was this big walnut tree in the yard, and these walnuts would fall off the trees and they'd get rotten and they would just stink up the entire yard. So it actually wasn't a volunteer assignment. It was my first paid assignment. One of the advocates had me start bagging up these walnuts and gave me $1 per bag. So I think I made 10 or 12 bucks, something like that, which for a 10-year-old is a lot of money. And I did other stuff like clean up the toys in the yard. If one of the mothers had to meet with an advocate, I'd play with their kids. So I was doing volunteer babysitting. Later on, they would give me summer jobs like mowing the yard, raking the leaves, things like that. Just basically anytime I was up there for a kids group or a counseling session, or they tutored me for a few years at geometry and summer camp. If they just needed something done, I made a point to do it.
We always felt the people who stayed more than 3 weeks, they stayed about 4 months, and that kept their connection, we liked that.
Once again, FRC played a major part in my life because they helped me as a child by saving my family's life through this situation, and they kind of introduced me into adulthood. My first job out of high school, I was a advocacy clerk for Family Refuge Center.
Well, actually, Roger came and said, I'm graduating from high school, and we said, you need a job, and we had just gotten some money to hire sort of a receptionist clerk to answer the phone and keep the database kinds of things.
So I joined the paid staff, 18 years old, first job out of high school. I had an office. I had my own computer with internet access. I had my own phone line, and I'm doing all this important stuff like answering the phones for the advocates, for handling the files, updating the database records.
And that was wonderful to be able to hire somebody that we'd followed for so long and was so much part of our Family Refuge Center family.
Main part of that job I really enjoyed was the fact that I was answering the phones, because Family Refuge Center, the domestic violence community, in large parts female, for obvious reasons. They help many more battered women and children just because that's the way the numbers are. There's so many more battered women and children than there are men in this movement. So, coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, there's not too many men who do day-to-day domestic violence stuff. I'm answering the phones. So when a client calls in an emergency situation, my voice is the first one they heard. Knowing the FRC put me in that kind of position, it really spoke to me. It meant a lot to me. Knowing I had that kind of responsibility and the fact that I was capable of doing it for as long as I did. I had that job for about 3 years, and that 3 years impacts me to this